Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on another Service Management Leadership Podcast. But as you know, it's been replaced the last few weeks with the Global ITAM Summit Year 2, second annual. This podcast, this episode is a breakout session with Rory Canavan from the UK. He brings a great process perspective to software and hardware asset management. Hopefully I did you much ado there, Rory.
I've heard far worse, Jeffrey. Thanks very much. That was great.
Maybe even for me. So we appreciate you in your perspective. It's different than our other guests. Our other guests are have other niches. Yours is process based. How does an organization get their stuff aligned up? How do we do it well? You know, the others are very niche, but this is how do we, from a program level, do things well? So what types of pain points are your customers experiencing? And part two of that is, what are you advising for solutions?
So what I tend to find with clients, there's possibly two main pots that they fall into, or maybe even three, in that they've never been anywhere near SAM before, and that they therefore believe the tool is the solution because they've had a salesman in or saleswoman, and that PowerPoint deck has promised to do everything bar make the coffee for them in the mornings. So all of a sudden then the tool becomes the solution. Or the client in question has just been through a vendor audit, and the likes of Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, et al. Have knocked on the door, and their ability to compare what they have installed versus what they've actually paid for has left them short financially. And then there are those who might have been through both of those scenarios, but then for whatever reason find that actually the tool isn't doing what they wanted or what they expected or what they hoped, and that they're getting very close to throwing that out and buying another tool because they know that tool will give them all the answers that they want. So they're the three main if you like, categories of clients that I sort of see or I have seen in the last few years. Yeah.
So how do you advise them going forward? Because they're all of them are reacting to something, right? You know, buy a tool, there's some trigger for that. Coming out of an audit or renewal, saying, hey, this is too expensive, I need to get in front of it. There's some kind of trigger to that. What are you helping them understand about the process view, not just the tool, set it and forget it, it'll take away all your worries, you'll be able to sleep at night kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's one of those things. We can do one of take two. We can take one of two approaches. Either we can look at the process side of life, look at the life cycle, see what's happening operationally, and maybe even spot weld around consultancy. And the use case of bad practice I like to talk about is the Bermuda Triangle of SAM, whereby your request, procurement, and deployment or change management processes aren't working in sync. And if they are not, then it's setting you up for the next vendor audit, the perfect storm of. And we can do that. That's fine. We can help organizations out there. We've got maturity assessments. We've got template process kits. We can roll those out. We can customize them as well. And that's where the true value actually comes in. But what we prefer to do, if we've got the time and the elbow room to actually do it, is to take a strategic approach, is to find out what the IT and business drivers are that SAM and ITAM are expected to answer. And once you have those in place, you can take a top-down approach, and it makes implementation that much easier because the higher ups have said, these KPIs, these processes, these activities are important to us, and we want a causal link between what you're doing operationally and what we see strategically. Go make it happen. So that's kind of the two main thrusts that we like to help clients with there.
You mentioned change management, and this is a common theme for me, is that every time an organization pushes new functionality live, they should have some type proactively understanding the impact to your licensing. Every time you're pushing new functionality live, you've bought more, you've added more license, you also have to pull back on the other side, but that has to be done at that moment proactively, not, hey, the auditors come knocking and now we have to figure out what we did, right?
Well, exactly. That worst case scenario, again, from a SAM and an ITAM perspective, is that the first time you find out about any new projects or programs that have rolled onto the IT estate is when they roll onto the IT estate. And these sort of golf course deals that have taken place that are, and they're not cheap either. They're 6, 7, 8 figures of IT infrastructure that has been rolled out, and the first time you hear about it is when it appears there's some random executables that appear on your SAM suite. So getting programs and projects to buy in, getting architects to buy in as well is a major boon if you can get that sorted, because God bless them, the architects will absolutely know the features and benefits of the products, but they won't know the T's and C's. So they'll have great ideas around, we can use this functionality here, we can connect it with that product there. And before you know it, they've written roughshod over the terms and conditions of the licenses and the contracts. And again, it's that perfect storm you're setting an organization up for of the Bermuda Triangle of SAM then, yeah.
Yeah, and if you're putting something new live, odds are you're pulling something else off of production, and that has a licensing impact as well.
Absolutely, and there is that other aspect too, as well. Of course, is that when such an initiative takes place, it's funded by the project, but then financially it has to be carried forward in a business as usual capacity. Who's going to take that up? All of it, somebody has made a decision somewhere up in the organization to say potentially, yes, I'll take that on board once it goes business as usual. That's the point at which the SAM people should be involved, because they'll need to monitor and track that they're sweating the assets then at that point.
Oh, yes. And it gets into that TCO model that every organization should have when you push something live. The SAM aspect has to be part of that TCO, total cost of ownership, through the life of whatever it is you're putting live.
Well, that's and thanks for mentioning that, Jeffrey, because that's one of the papers that we actually have on our white papers side is using SAM to create and maintain your CMDB. Mm-hmm. So if from a service management perspective, you think of your services running north to south, and then you think of your compliance issues and your vendors running east to west, so you have this tartan of IT almost. If you're in a position to customize and use -2 tags, software ID tags, if you can align those tags to the IT service, all of a sudden you're in a much better position to start offering TCO and ROI against given IT services. So if you get the chance, folks, do head along there, have a look at that white paper. It'll be a life changer for you.
Yes, and I'm a big believer of cost of the services and understanding costs of outages, because I don't think organizations, they're ostriches. They stick their head in the sand and they don't want to know what those numbers are. And especially if an organization's looking at outsourcing or something of that nature, you have to know inherently what's the cost of that service, so I know, is it better to keep it in-house or move it out-house? And then you think about the trickle down of the SAM piece of that, it gets exponential. I mean, those decisions all multiply off of one another.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you think about the OSI 7-layer reference model, way back when, I appreciate we're going back to our college times here, where the sort of the application, the data link, the physical, all of those sort of aspects of the model converted electricity into the underline and bold on your Word document and back again. Increasingly now, those physical components are becoming software and software related. So the ability to tag, manage, and monitor those as part of a given IT service are ever more important. So the weight of responsibility on the SAM and ITAM people to provide that cost benefit analysis for a given IT service becomes greater and greater as the days go on.
Oh, yes. And we could go deeper and deeper on this. And because I enjoy these conversations, because there's so many layers, it's like an onion, that leaders need to understand how to control the decision so that Dave in the data center is not controlling that decision. Leaders have to own that decision for SAM, for ITAM, for all of service management, so that they understand it can make the right decision. And if I'm a leader, I want to make that decision. I don't want to defer it and to keep kicking the can down the road. Let's move on to the second topic. This is another great one. So as we come out of the pandemic, whenever it is, wherever you may be in the audience, it's coming. The pandemic end is coming, and I'm expecting organizations to accelerate their transformations. Whatever their initiatives are, now they have to be done twice as fast. And because pocketbooks are going to open up, after 2020, 2021 is going to be full of excitement. But I think that many of these transformations are going to have software asset management components. And where having a strong process and program in this area will help, whether the transformation's SAM related or SAM is a way to enable those outcomes. Because if you're putting in Salesforce, for example, you need somebody at the seat of the table that knows how to tell you and advise you about those licensing, whatever it is. But is this your feeling as well, as that there's an acceleration coming? And what do you think people need to hear? Maybe not want to hear, need to hear before they embark on this journey?
I think there is a dawning realization that there are people at the end of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so depending on where you were in the world, depending what degree of lockdown you went into, or whether you started working remotely from home, all of a sudden the requirement to have Zoom, to have Teams, to have that functionality, or even basically a laptop worthy of being able to work from home, that sort of demand and supply had to be thrashed out very quickly. And some organizations thrived and reveled in the challenge, and others fell down. So I think people focused ITAM is going to be the dawning realization, particularly as cloud really takes hold and ramps up, because it's only growing. So all of a sudden, if heaven forbid an organization looks to rationalize its workforce, it should also be rationalizing its IT infrastructure at the same time. Now, we paraphrase that as a joiners, movers, leavers activity in our good old process kit. What else do I think is going to take place in 2021? There's been a lot of would I call it guerrilla activity around the auditing of clients.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that software vendors are having a tough time of it because spend is down potentially, or is being diverted to comms and networking components and technologies. But I think that will go from guerrilla to open warfare as nations start to open up again, as the new normal dawns, whatever that eventually looks like. I think the software vendors are going to they're going to kick off the camouflage, and they're just going to start gunning for people left, right, and center. I don't think there's going to be any sort of retiring violets about this at all. They're just going to be steaming in there into their client base.
Yep, and I'm right there with you. And so if you think of that going on while we're trying to have these transformations, these and accelerate outcomes, there's going to be a collision. But even on that, where you were going, I really see this role of Sam being an executive partner at the table, because along with this acceleration means more partners and service providers. It means more of a lot of things. Plus, you get into this. In the US, they call it a gig economy, or Uberizing the workforce. Those are, you cannot trust. I use the illustration of Dave in the data center. Dave may be a 20-year guy, but now you're replacing him with somebody who this is their gig, not their job. And now how does that impact your SAM? I mean, there are so many layers to this that really leaders need to be thoughtful of.
Yeah, and I think it's a warning. I say a warning. It's a caution to SAM and ITAM professionals as well. They need to get their head away from the acronyms and the technology, and start to take a business appreciation, if they're not doing so already, obviously, of what the technology does for the business. And it's that what if, what if we don't use this technology, or what if we use an alternative technology? What is the consequence for the business then at that point? And using business terminology to people who have risen through the ranks and not been anywhere near IT.
Yeah. And because let's be honest, the technology footprint within organizations is growing exponentially. And it's not just IT. You think a hospital, technology's everywhere. You think of a bank, technology's everywhere. Even manufacturing, they've gone more technology and less personnel heavy. And so, to your point, it's going to take people and brain power, not technology, to be able to maximize and gain efficiency, especially with the move to the cloud, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it is, and it goes back to that point about the that we raised previously on IT services as well. So we're back to spend, we're back to potentially value for money. That cost benefit analysis, it's going to cost us 3 million to stand up a new IT service. Are we realistically going to see 6 million in sales in the first year? Is it actually worth it?
Oh yeah, it's coming quick. And so I want to dive a little deeper to something you said about being people centric, bringing that back. So in the US, we're still overly tool centric in the SAM space. My view, I don't want to push it out on you or anyone else. But in the SAM space, a tool will solve all your problems. It's a panacea. Whatever your problems are, buy a tool. And I don't want to get too far down there and offend way more people. But Europe has swung the pendulum back to where it's a balanced approach, people, process, technology. How can the US get to that level of maturity? And I say the US, organizations within the US.
So in my own humble opinion, what I would look to advocate wherever possible is to take an ISO based approach. So within SAM and ITAM, there is the ISO 19770 family of standards, and -1 is the ISO standard for processes. And what you seek to do is to create an outcome-based approach to managing SAM and ITAM. And once you have an idea of what you want to have happen, who you want to have drive those activities, and what data they need to complete those activities, then all of a sudden you start to realize, well, this tech here is going to answer that problem, and this tech there is going to answer that problem. And you flush out, it's almost like going through a requirements definition. And you do that first, because that then it will give you that long-term objective or view as to how long will that technology actually support us moving forward. And what it will also give you the potential to do is to say, well, if the company is going to grow over X number of years, will the technology scale? And that's another important thing, because you don't want to get 2 years down the road and find that actually we have got to rip technology out, and we have got to reintegrate, and we have got to recustomize. So having an eye on the long game, I think, is absolutely vital. But what that also offers you to do is that if you have mapped your processes out and you've done it right, if you do replace the technology, if your documentation is of value, you'll be able to see where that technology impacts, and you can be surgical with those updates and upgrades.
Yeah, and take that a step further. If your organization is pushed into the cloud, it's gonna determine your other contracts. Because I use this analogy: if I'm on XYZ server software, and I move that to the cloud, it impacts my Windows server licensing. It may impact my Oracle database licensing. And so I need to adjust those other contracts to fit my overarching strategy to move everything to the cloud. I mean, there's layers and layers of impact from one decision to move things to the cloud.
Oh, totally. I mean, I had it with a client in Saudi Arabia. They banged the drum for all non-essential servers to go to the cloud, because it was going to save them a load of money on their hardware support and maintenance on their physical instances of tin. And I just pointedly asked, I said, who's doing the check to make sure that the licenses that are on premise are permissible to work in the cloud? Oh yeah, the system owners are doing that. And yeah, I went straight to the head of SAM. I said, you've got a major problem. You've done 75 of these. You've got another 225 in the pipeline. Nobody is checking the licenses to make sure they're okay to host in the cloud. And he goes, Rory, don't give me problems. And he just walked away. And he's the head of SAM. He's the head of SAM. So, it's not unique. There are issues out there that we have to be dynamic and agile too.
Right. And I just meant one decision impacts 4 contracts or 5 contracts of other software publishers. And we have to be able to see that, the human side, from a big picture and understand those implications. Tool will not tell you that. The tool will not tell you. I always use this one example, Rory, and you can laugh at me, is at a previous company, we had a mixture because one major ITAM tool integrated into another. Because, let's have the best. It had a certain Adobe title that showed green. Everybody said, that's awesome. I pull it up because hey, what does green mean? It means we have 14 and 0 are used. That's not green to me. That may be compliant, but not efficient. And only when you have the people in the process side will you be able to move that needle on the efficiency side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all got the war stories. We really have. That same organization, we found Adobe desktop software installed on the server estate. Now admittedly, we went sort of, shall we say, full on audit with the findings, but we highlighted a potential liability of 55 million US for 68 installs of desktop software. And again, the SAM manager said, Rory, I have a problem. The people with those servers, some of them are my friends. At which point I said, well, if they're your friends, they won't have any problems removing the software, will they? And then he just, no, chunter, and off he went, because it's political, it's cultural. And that's perhaps something that we don't advocate enough within SAM and ITAM. It's not just the zeros and the ones. It's the touchy-feely stuff as well.
Yes, and it needs to move up the organization to the leadership decision making. That's my thesis statement for this conversation. Is it's been pushed down too many layers over time, and it needs to be elevated back up. So if you're the CEO of a large organization, you want to make that decision. You don't want some outsourced contractor making that decision for you. You may not even want your director making that decision, because they may not understand that if we get audited, it's going to cost us 6 figures, possibly 7 figures. And you as the CEO, that's painful to you. Or the risk mitigation of having a breach because you have the wrong stuff installed. I mean, there's so many, use cases here. All I'm saying is it needs to be moved up the organization so the leaders have control of those decisions.
Yeah, and that again is the nice thing about ISO 19770. It does actually bang the drum and say you should be plugging into some sort of a risk management process and activity, so that if you do identify risks, it's that Deming cycle thing. It's that plan, do, check, and act. Is that you feed those risks as they occur into a formal risk management activity, so that senior management has visibility of it real time, as opposed to, oh, we've got audited and we've just run up an 8-figure liability. No, you flag it as it happens.
And it needs to. It's a great conversation. I thank you for your time and expertise, Rory. How can the audience get in touch with you if they say, that Rory guy has a great accent? How can I talk to him more?
Well, if they do, thank you very much. First off, I would say look for me on LinkedIn. I don't think there's too many Rory Canavans on LinkedIn. Email me at rory.canavan@samcharter.com or info@samcharter.com. I think that's it. They're the 2 primary means of reaching out and getting in touch.
And just to summarize, Rory lives where some of our other panel guests are very niche in terms of IBM, software, Oracle. Rory lives on the people and process side, program level side. How do we maximize what we're doing? Is that fair, Rory?
That's very fair. Thanks very much. Yes.
And so I think Rory excels. He and his team at Sam Charter do an excellent job. Rory, thank you for joining us, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I appreciate the time.
Have a great day. Bye.